Well, Schwarzenegger just jumped on that right away. He said, well, let's study it, let's get a committee together, and in 2006, a climate action team was put together, and their idea, the whole point of that was to figure out some sort of response based on some of the direction that had been coming out at the international level, and at the national level too, to some extent, not really since this current administration has been in, but previously there had been some work toward the Kyoto Accords and trying to work with that. But the idea is to come up with a bunch of land use strategy which would somehow reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In 2006, there was a state bill, AB 32. AB means assembly bill. It's a state law. That basically said, hey, we as a state have a target now. We're going to reduce our emissions from everything back to 1990 levels by 2020. That's essentially a 25% reduction of the current carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, which is a radical kind of, not radical so much, but difficult step for a growing state as big as California. But it had no real implementation mechanism, but set in motion further laws. And the next one just came last year, last September, a new law was passed. This is just happening now, SB 97, and now it requires climate change to be studied in environmental documents. That's what this CEQA means. I'll get into that briefly again. But it means now there's a mechanism, this state law, CEQA, which has been on the books since 1970, which means the Environmental Quality Act, California Environmental Quality Act, where you have to study environmental impacts before we just be looking at traffic or noise or air quality. Now we have to look at climate change too. But it didn't say how to do that, it just said do it. And it said, and by the way, we'll figure out how to develop methodologies to do that by 2010. Well, I mean, yeah, you think, well, okay, I'm a consultant, I have to do this. It's actually the law telling us do this, and we don't know how to do this. So what the state is really saying is, hey, consultants, you figure it out. And the timing of me being here is actually excellent. Last Friday, I was at a conference right where near I live. It was actually a legal update, California law. What's happened over the past year in California to change how we do planning or environmental review or other things that have nothing to do with me. And a big theme was climate change. And a big theme was how to deal with this new law, for example, SB 97. And the person who was the keynote speaker was the head of what they call OPR, the Office of Planning and Research in California. Schwarzenegger's Assistant Chief of Staff. And she's giving the whole program, here's what we're going to have to do, and you're all going to have to figure this out by 2010. And I took it out, I'm sitting in this room full of attorneys and planners from the cities, the city planning director from major cities in California and counties, but no other consultants. So I thought, this is an opportunity for me. So I got up to, well, here's what we're doing, and by the way, here's my card. And in the end, okay, and then after all that, I went to talk to her about all this stuff, and I asked her all this, what are you guys doing, do you want all our stuff? She was like, oh, that would be great, that would really be good. So in other words, there's this law, here's the head of OPR who's saying, well, let's do this. But when you actually talk to the person in charge, it's sort of like approached from a bureaucratic standpoint. You know, we'll do this sometime, somehow. And I don't mean to overstate that, but that's a typical response when you're dealing with government agencies. You're not sure how much support you're going to get or where it goes. But what she did say was, you know what? We don't have the manpower to figure it out ourselves. We're going to rely on consultants to do it. And so they're going to rely on people like us, our firm, and other firms like us to figure it out. And so that's why we're leading the way right here. And we will be the people figuring it out. So what is actually being done? And is it based on actual science or politics or practical reality or a little of both or all of it? Because you can't have both when there's three things. But, and that's what I want to talk about now. So again, the concept is water shortages, all kinds of problems, a fertile legal environment in California, climate change gets thrown into the mix, and relatively quick response is happening at the state level. This slide is blurry, and I don't really know why. But this one, I just want to give you an overview of where carbon emissions are coming from in California. Cars, 35%, industry, 25%. So 60% of climate emissions are either from cars or industrial uses. I mean, CO2 emissions. The rest are household uses, commercial uses, agriculture. Again, this is difficult to read, but this came out of the Climate Action Report in 2006, the one Schwarzenegger had commissioned. And basically what they asked them to do is, where can we find ways to reduce emissions? From what sectors? How can we do it? Their conclusion was, based on looking at a lot of papers that people like Tom and Rosanna have come up with and other climate scientists, they looked at it and said, well, you know, based on that and a lot of other things we've learned from other sources, vehicles are the big thing we can pull back on. Our forestry practices are a big thing we can pull back on. And dealing with developing the land in a smarter way is a way we can deal with it too. So they figured that's a better than 50% of the sources of, those are the three big things to target for emission reductions. Okay, I'll hit this very briefly. The latest law, like I said, is one that says, hey, climate change is real, let's deal with it in the California environmental regulatory environment. Gives the state Office of Planning and Research, they're the ones who are going to figure out the methodology. That's significant that it's them. You know, when the call first came out that this was going to happen, the consensus was it was going to be the state's Air Resources Board that was going to figure it all out, because it was being treated as a pollutant. Let the air quality people do it. Let the scientists at the state level figure it out. But somehow between 2005 and now, it somehow politically got shifted to as a planning function, not a science function, which I think is a good thing, frankly, because let the scientists be scientists. I think when you get scientists in the bureaucratic side of things at the state level, they're not really practicing science anyway. So let the planners deal with it. The relevant thing to take out of this is methodologies have to be figured out by 2010. But in the meantime, we're trying to figure out interim methodologies. And so what the state's been doing is tracking what people have been doing. Here's what they've been doing. I don't know that we need to go through this. This is a slide I threw in here just as a reminder. The California Environmental Quality Act. Again, this is the key mechanism to everything. This is the mechanism. Without this, we can't do anything else because there's no mechanism to implement whatever direction the state says to put onto actual development. It's the thing that the public gets involved with and the policymakers have to deal with. In a quick nutshell, what happens is you and I come in to develop a new shopping center. If that happens in most states, you go to the planning department and you get a permit to do whatever you need to do. They check to see if you're going to impact any wetlands or federal type of issues. And if you don't, if you're in compliance with the local plan, go for it, pay some fees, and you do it. California, it doesn't work that way. You go to the planning department, you fill out the application, you do all those things, and then they say, now we have to do environmental review, which could be a small thing. They can look and do a checklist and determine you don't have a problem. Or it could be a big thing. And a big project, you have to do an environmental impact report, usually getting a consultant involved like me. And it's a long, 400-page document that explains everything about anything that could happen as a result of your project. The main significance of that is it's a disclosure document that lets people know, hey, this is what's going to happen. Lets people come in the public process. There have to be hearings where people can be heard in front of the city council. Hey, this is a bad idea because you're going to create 5 times as much traffic as today or whatever it might be. And then in the end, the city council can approve the project in spite of all the impacts. But they do so, they have to make a finding saying we're going to do it in spite of all the impacts. So there's a political payoff at the end. You can do whatever you want, but you're on notice. If you've done it against the will of what people have otherwise come out against, sometimes people don't care. There's a feedback loop. So if you do too many things that are a little off base, you're likely to be out of office in the next election. And that's the real, that's the teeth of the state law. Keep pushing through that one. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so what's actually happening right now in terms of greenhouse gas emission analysis? As I say, SEEP was the mechanism, and it's quickly evolving. There's a lot of lawsuits floating around that are just getting right to help provide some direction on how to do things without methodology. One classic example is the state attorney general, who's Jerry Brown, who I don't know if some of you might remember.